Number 1. Creflo Dollar, Georgia, United States. The name itself sounds like satire. Creflo Dollar, a preacher whose very name evokes wealth, prosperity, and the pursuit of material blessing. And for decades, that's exactly what he preached. But in 2012, the world got a glimpse behind the curtain, and what they saw would ignite a firestorm of controversy that still burns today. Creflo Dollar founded World Changers Church International in College Park, Georgia in 1986. What started as a small congregation of 8 people meeting in an elementary school cafeteria exploded into a megachurch empire. By the 2000s, World Changers was pulling in tens of millions of dollars annually, broadcasting to millions worldwide, and positioning Dollar as one of the most influential voices in the prosperity gospel movement. The prosperity gospel, often called the health and wealth gospel, teaches that financial blessing and physical well-being are direct rewards of faith. Give generously to God, Reid, to the church, and God will multiply your investment. Critics call it theological heresy. Supporters call it biblical truth. But no one could deny that for Creflo Dollar, prosperity wasn't just theology, it was lifestyle. He lived in a $2.5 million mansion in Atlanta. He owned multiple luxury cars. He traveled in private jets, and he never apologized for it. In fact, he defended it. God wanted his people blessed, Dollar preached. Poverty was a curse. Abundance was a birthright for believers. But in June 2012, something happened that shattered the carefully curated image of spiritual authority and family values. Cobb County Sheriff's deputies were called to Dollar's home after a domestic dispute. According to the police report, Dollar's 15-year-old daughter alleged that he had assaulted her during an argument, punching her, choking her, and slamming her to the ground. The accusations were specific. They were disturbing, and they were made against a man who had spent decades telling millions how to live godly lives. Dollar denied the allegations. He called them exaggerated and taken out of context. His daughter, he said, had been disciplined, not abused. His wife and another daughter backed his account. Church members rallied to his defense, packing the courthouse, holding prayer vigils, and flooding social media with messages of support. The charges were eventually dropped. Prosecutors cited conflicting accounts and insufficient evidence to move forward. Dollar returned to his pulpit and preached a sermon about spiritual warfare, persecution, and standing firm in the face of accusations. To his followers, it was vindication. To his critics, it was a man escaping accountability. But the arrest was just the beginning. In 2015, Creflo Dollar made an announcement that would trigger one of the most controversial fundraising campaigns in modern American Christianity. He needed a new airplane. Not just any airplane, a Gulfstream G650, one of the most expensive, luxurious private jets in the world. Price tag? $65 million. Dollar's ministry posted a video on its website explaining the need. The current plane, they said, was old, unreliable, and costly to maintain. Dollar traveled the world spreading the gospel. He needed a reliable aircraft to fulfill his mission. And so, the ministry launched Project G650, asking 200,000 of Dollar's followers to donate $300 each. The backlash was immediate and brutal. News outlets covered it relentlessly. Late-night comedians mocked it. Christian leaders from across the theological spectrum condemned it. Even prosperity gospel supporters distanced themselves. The optics were indefensible. A preacher worth an estimated $27 million asking working-class congregants to fund a $65 million jet. Critics pointed out that commercial flights exist, that mission organizations operate on shoestring budgets, that Jesus walked. Dollar doubled down. He defended the campaign, arguing that if Jesus were alive today, he wouldn't be riding a donkey, he'd have the finest transportation available. He accused critics of jealousy and spiritual immaturity. He framed opposition as persecution. But the public pressure was relentless. Within weeks, the ministry quietly removed the fundraising video. Dollar issued a vague statement about moving forward in wisdom. The jet campaign was abandoned, officially at least. But here's what most people don't know. Creflo Dollar eventually got his jet. Not a G650, but in the years following the controversy, financial disclosures and investigative reports revealed that Dollar's ministry had acquired a Gulfstream III, a slightly older model but still valued in the tens of millions of dollars. Exactly how it was funded remains murky. The ministry, like most religious organizations, operates with minimal financial transparency. Today, Creflo Dollar still preaches. World Changers Church International still operates, and Dollar still defends the prosperity gospel, still lives in luxury, and still rejects criticism as spiritual warfare. But for millions of people, both inside and outside the church, the arrest and the jet campaign left permanent stains. They raised questions that refused to go away. Is this what faith looks like? Is this what ministry is supposed to be? And if a man preaching humility lives in a mansion and asks for millions, who is he really serving? The charges were dropped, the jet was acquired, the ministry continues, but trust, once shattered, is almost impossible to fully restore. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Number 2. Todd Bentley, Canada. Todd Bentley was a rock star. Not literally, though with his heavily tattooed arms, shaved head, and biker aesthetic, he looked more like a member of a metal band than a traditional preacher. But in 2008, within Pentecostal and charismatic Christian circles, Bentley was a phenomenon. And then, just as quickly as he rose, he fell, taking with him the faith of thousands who believed he spoke for God. Bentley grew up in British Columbia, Canada. His early life was marked by instability, abuse, and addiction. By his own account, he had been molested as a child, struggled with drugs and alcohol, and was in and out of trouble with the law. Then, in his late teens, he claimed to have a dramatic conversion experience, a supernatural encounter with God that set him on a radically different path. By the early 2000s, Bentley had become an evangelist. He traveled the world preaching healing, deliverance, and supernatural signs. He was charismatic, unpolished, and unapologetically aggressive in his style. He would shout, stomp, and even physically push people during prayer, claiming the Holy Spirit was working through him. And then came Lakeland. In April 2008, Bentley arrived in Lakeland, Florida for what was supposed to be a 5-day revival meeting. It turned into a 6-month spectacle that attracted hundreds of thousands of attendees and was broadcast live to millions more via streaming video and Christian television networks. Night after night, Bentley preached to packed crowds at the Lakeland Center. People came from around the world, drawn by reports of miraculous healings, cancer cured, paralysis reversed, the blind seeing, the deaf hearing. Bentley claimed that angels visited him, that he had visions of heaven, and that God was moving in unprecedented ways. The Lakeland revival became a media sensation. Christian networks covered it extensively. Prominent pastors flew in to endorse it. Bentley was ordained by a group of influential charismatic leaders, cementing his legitimacy. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. In August 2008, just months after the height of the Lakeland revival, Bentley abruptly stepped down from public ministry. The official statement was vague, citing personal issues and a need for restoration. But within days, the truth leaked. Bentley had been having an extramarital affair with a woman on his ministry staff. He had separated from his wife and was planning to marry the other woman. The charismatic community was stunned. The same leaders who had publicly endorsed Bentley now scrambled to distance themselves. The revival meetings ended. The broadcasts stopped. and thousands of people who had believed Bentley was a prophet were left questioning everything they had witnessed. Bentley eventually divorced his wife and married his mistress. He took a brief hiatus from ministry, underwent what was described as a restoration process, and then, remarkably, returned to preaching. By 2012, he was back on the road, holding healing crusades and rebuilding his ministry brand. But the controversy was far from over. In 2019, an independent panel of church leaders launched an investigation into Bentley's conduct. The investigation had been triggered by new allegations, not just of sexual misconduct, but of spiritual abuse, manipulation, and a pattern of behavior that had been hidden for years. The panel interviewed dozens of individuals, former staff, ministry partners, and people who had been close to Bentley. What they uncovered was deeply troubling. Multiple women came forward with allegations of sexual misconduct, spanning years. Others described a culture of intimidation, control, and exploitation within Bentley's ministry. In their findings, the panel stated that the allegations were credible and substantiated. Bentley was found to have engaged in behavior that violated both Christian ethics and basic standards of decency. The panel recommended that Bentley be removed from ministry leadership indefinitely and undergo long-term accountability and counseling. Bentley initially resisted, but under mounting pressure, he eventually stepped down from his leadership role at Fresh Fire Ministries, the organization he had founded. He issued a public statement acknowledging moral failures and expressing regret for the pain he had caused. But for many of his victims and former supporters, the apology rang hollow. One woman who came forward described how Bentley had used his spiritual authority to manipulate her into a sexual relationship. She had been young, vulnerable, and looking for guidance. Bentley, she said, convinced her that God had ordained their relationship. When she tried to leave, he threatened her, telling her that speaking out would bring a curse on her life. Another former staff member described a ministry environment where questioning Bentley was equated with resisting God. Fear, not faith, kept people in line. Experts who study spiritual abuse say Bentley's case is textbook. Charismatic leaders with unchecked authority, minimal accountability, and a theology that equates their words with God's voice create perfect conditions for exploitation. When followers believe that obeying the leader is obeying God, abuse becomes almost inevitable. Today, Todd Bentley remains active in some ministry circles, though his influence is a fraction of what it once was. He still holds occasional meetings and maintains a small following. But the legacy of the Lakeland revival and the subsequent scandals has left a permanent mark on the charismatic movement. For those who attended Lakeland, who sent money, who believed the miracles were real, the betrayal is profound. Many have left the church entirely. Others have become deeply skeptical of charismatic leaders and supernatural claims. And the questions remain. Were any of the healings real? Or was it all manipulation, mass hysteria, and a man skilled at reading a crowd? The prophet who promised miracles delivered only devastation. Number 3. Hinn, California, United States. If you've ever flipped through late-night Christian television, you've probably seen him. A man in an expensive suit, standing on a stage in front of thousands, waving his hand as people fall backward in waves, slain in the spirit, they call it. His name is Hinn, and for decades he has been one of the most famous and controversial televangelists in the world. Hinn was born Tufik Benedictus Hinn in Jaffa, Israel, in 1952. His family immigrated to Canada when he was a teenager,
and it was there, he claims, that he experienced a dramatic conversion to Christianity. By the 1970s, Hinn had begun preaching, and by the 1980s, he had become a fixture on Christian television, hosting miracle crusades that attracted tens of thousands of attendees. The formula was simple. Hinn would preach about faith and healing, then invite people forward to be healed of diseases: cancer, diabetes, paralysis, blindness. Nothing, Hinn claimed, was beyond the power of God. And as the music swelled and the crowd roared, people would fall to the ground, some claiming they had been instantly healed. It was powerful. It was emotional. And for millions of viewers, it was evidence that God was real and still performing miracles. But not everyone was convinced. Investigative journalists began scrutinizing Hinn's crusades as early as the 1990s. They interviewed people who claimed to have been healed, only to discover that many of them still had their illnesses. Medical records told a different story than Hinn's stage testimonies. Some people who had walked to the stage with assistance were presented as having been cured of paralysis. Others who claimed healing at the crusade were dead within months. Critics accused Hinn of exploiting desperate, sick people, of creating an environment where emotional manipulation was mistaken for divine intervention, and of profiting enormously from the suffering of others. By the mid-2000s, Hinn's finances became the focus of a major investigation. In 2007, U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, launched an inquiry into the financial practices of 6 prominent televangelists, Benny Hinn among them. Grassley, who chaired the Senate Finance Committee, wanted answers about how these ministries were spending donor money. The numbers were staggering. Hinn's ministry, Benny Hinn Ministries, brought in tens of millions of dollars annually. Much of it came from elderly viewers on fixed incomes, convinced that their $50 or $100 donation would result in miraculous financial blessings. But where was the money going? Grassley's investigation revealed troubling patterns. Hinn owned multiple properties, including a $10 million oceanfront home in California. He traveled in private jets. He stayed in luxury hotels. His family members were on the ministry payroll, earning 6-figure salaries. When Grassley requested financial records, Hinn initially refused to comply. He argued that as a religious organization, his ministry was not obligated to disclose its finances to the government. But as public pressure mounted and media coverage intensified, Hinn eventually provided limited documentation. The revelations were damning. Donors who thought they were funding crusades and humanitarian work were actually funding a lavish lifestyle. And then there was the personal scandal. In 2010, Hinn and his wife Suzanne announced they were divorcing after more than 30 years of marriage. The statement cited irreconcilable differences, but reports soon surfaced alleging that Hinn had been having an affair, or multiple affairs. One report claimed he had been seen with televangelist Paula White, another prosperity gospel preacher, in Rome. Both denied the allegations, but the damage was done. Hinn and Suzanne briefly reconciled in 2013, only to separate again permanently in 2016. The divorce finalized quietly, but the scandal had further eroded Hinn's credibility. In recent years, Hinn has made what some have called a partial pivot. In 2019, he appeared on a podcast where he renounced certain aspects of the prosperity gospel, saying he regretted ever teaching that faith could be used to manipulate God into giving material wealth. He called some of his past teachings an offense to the Lord and apologized for misleading people. It was a stunning admission from a man who had built an empire on prosperity theology. But critics were skeptical. Was this genuine repentance? Or was it a rebranding effort by a man whose brand was in freefall? Hinn still holds crusades. He still asks for money. And he still claims healings occur at his events, though independent verification remains elusive. For the families who mortgaged their homes to donate to Hinn's ministry, for the sick who died believing a miracle was just one more donation away, for the millions who trusted him, the apology came too late. Benny Hinn built a fortune on faith, but the foundation was rotten. And the question remains, how many people are still believing a miracle is coming when all that's really happening is a man getting rich? Number 4. Shepherd Bushiri, international case, South Africa, Malawi. He called himself Major One, a prophet, a man of God, a spiritual giant whose prayers could heal the sick, raise the dead, and multiply wealth. But when South African authorities finally caught up with Shepherd Bushiri, they called him something else, a fraud. Shepherd Bushiri was born in Malawi in 1983. By his early 20s, he had launched himself into ministry, founding Enlightened Christian Gathering, a Pentecostal megachurch that would eventually attract thousands of followers across southern Africa. Bushiri preached the prosperity gospel with theatrical flair, claiming miraculous healings, prophetic visions, and supernatural financial blessings for those who gave generously. And give they did. By the 2010s, Bushiri had amassed a stunning fortune. He owned
cars, Maseratis, Rolls-Royces, Lamborghinis. He wore designer suits and expensive watches. He lived in a mansion and traveled in private jets. His lifestyle was on full, unapologetic display. To his followers, Bushiri's wealth was proof of God's favor. He was a living testament to the power of faith. But to investigators, it looked like something else entirely, a carefully constructed con. In 2020, South African authorities arrested Bushiri and his wife, Mary, on charges of fraud and money laundering. The allegations were staggering. Prosecutors claimed that Bushiri had operated an investment scheme that defrauded investors out of millions of rand. He had promised massive returns on agricultural and forex investments, using his spiritual authority to assure followers that God had ordained the scheme. But the investments were fake, the returns never materialized, and the money, millions of dollars, had been funneled into Bushiri's personal accounts, used to fund his extravagant lifestyle. The investigation also revealed that Bushiri had been operating with suspicious connections. Money had been moved across borders in ways that raised red flags. Shell companies had been used to obscure the flow of funds, and some of the money appeared to be connected to organized crime networks. Bushiri and his wife were released on bail while awaiting trial, but just weeks later, they vanished. In November 2020, South African authorities discovered that Bushiri and Mary had fled the country illegally. They had crossed the border into Malawi, their home country, despite court orders prohibiting them from leaving South Africa. The escape triggered an international manhunt. South African officials demanded Bushiri's extradition. Malawi initially signaled cooperation, but then stalled, citing procedural concerns. Bushiri, meanwhile, claimed he had fled because his life was in danger and he could not receive a fair trial in South Africa. The case became a diplomatic incident. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa publicly condemned Bushiri's escape, calling it an affront to justice. Malawian authorities faced intense pressure but continued to delay extradition proceedings. As of 2025, Shepherd Bushiri remains in Malawi, still preaching, still claiming to be persecuted, and still living in luxury. South Africa has issued an Interpol red notice, but extradition remains stalled. For the thousands of people who gave Bushiri their savings, who mortgaged their homes, and who believed God was speaking through him, there has been no justice, no restitution, no accountability. Bushiri's case is emblematic of a disturbing trend in global Christianity, the rise of prosperity preachers who operate with minimal oversight, exploit vulnerable communities, and then flee when legal consequences arrive. His followers still defend him.
They believe the charges are fabricated, that he's being persecuted for his faith. But the financial records tell a different story. They show a man who enriched himself at the expense of those who trusted him most. Shepherd Bushiri is still free, his victims are still broke, and the megachurch he built still operates, still preaching prosperity, still collecting offerings. The prophet who promised miracles delivered only devastation. Number 5. Michael Reid, United Kingdom. Michael Reid wasn't just a preacher, he was a brand. Known as Bishop Michael Reid, he founded Peniel Pentecostal Church in Brentwood, Essex, England, and built it into one of the UK's most prominent independent megachurches. He was charismatic, controversial, and uncompromising. He preached traditional values, conservative morality, and the absolute authority of the Bible. And for decades, thousands followed him without question. But in April 2008, the bishop's carefully constructed empire came crashing down. Reid was a former police officer and insurance salesman who entered ministry in the 1970s. By the 1980s, he had established Peniel Church and quickly gained a reputation as a fiery, authoritarian leader. He preached against homosexuality, abortion, and what he called the moral decay of British society. He ran high-profile advertising campaigns promoting the church, often featuring bold headlines about miracles and divine healing. But inside Peniel, a different reality was unfolding. Former members later described Reid's leadership style as controlling, abusive, and cult-like. Congregants were expected to give large portions of their income to the church. Some gave everything. Reid lived lavishly, driving Mercedes, living in expensive homes, and maintaining a lifestyle that seemed inconsistent with his calls for sacrificial giving. Questioning Reid was seen as questioning God. Those who raised concerns were publicly rebuked, shamed, or exiled. Families were torn apart. Some members lost their savings, their education, and their mental health. And yet for years, Reid's authority went unchallenged. Then came the confession. In April 2008, Reid issued a statement to his congregation admitting that he had been involved in an extramarital sexual relationship. The affair, it was revealed, had lasted for 8 years and involved the church's music director, a married woman who had worked closely with Reid. Reid resigned immediately. His statement was brief. "I confess that I have sinned by committing adultery. I recognize that I have failed in my duties and acted in a way that harmed the church. I apologize to my wife and family and all of you whose trust I have betrayed." But the fallout had only just begun. As Reid stepped down, former members began speaking out. Stories of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and authoritarian control flooded online forums and media outlets. Investigative reports revealed that Reid had been accused of multiple affairs over the years, not just one. At the employment tribunal, where Reid was claiming unfair dismissal, additional allegations surfaced. A second woman claimed she had been in a sexual relationship with Reid for 13 years. A third woman made further allegations of sexual misconduct. The tribunal rejected Reid's claim. The judge described him as forceful and abrasive and noted that his behavior was utterly contrary to his church's teachings. But the scandals didn't stop with sexual misconduct. In 2009, Reid was arrested on suspicion of historical rape. The case did not result in charges, but the arrest itself further devastated what remained of his reputation. Meanwhile, Peniel Church, now trying to rebuild under new leadership, faced its own reckoning. An independent investigation commissioned by the church in 2015 found evidence of widespread spiritual abuse, financial exploitation, and a toxic culture that had persisted for decades. Former members described being coerced into giving money, being disciplined with physical punishment, including reports of children being hit with table tennis paddles, and being told that leaving the church would result in divine curses. The investigation recommended significant reforms, public apologies, and financial restitution to victims. Some reforms were implemented, some apologies were issued, but many former members felt the response was inadequate. Reid himself never faced criminal prosecution for the financial or spiritual abuse allegations. He moved to the United States, continued preaching in smaller venues, and maintained a low profile. In January 2023, Michael Reid died at the age of 79. His death sparked renewed discussion in the UK about the damage he had caused. One blogger who had chronicled Reid's abuses for years wrote, "Reid may be gone, but the trauma he inflicted on thousands of people remains." For the families who lost everything under Reid's leadership, for the women who were exploited, for the children who grew up in fear, there has been no justice, no restitution, no accountability. Michael Reid built an empire on spiritual authority, but his legacy is one of betrayal, abuse, and unchecked power. And his story raises a question that echoes far beyond one church in England. How many other leaders in how many other churches are operating the same way right now?
Number 6. Bruxy Cavey, Ontario, Canada. Bruxy Cavey was different. He didn't wear suits. He didn't preach fire and brimstone sermons. He was casual, approachable, and relentlessly focused on deconstructing traditional Christianity. He preached Jesus over religion and built one of Canada's largest megachurches by appealing to people who were turned off by conventional church culture. And for years he was celebrated as a visionary leader, until investigators uncovered a pattern of abuse that shattered his reputation and devastated his congregation. Cavey was the lead teaching pastor at the Meeting House, an Anabaptist megachurch headquartered in Oakville, Ontario. Under his leadership, the church grew exponentially, eventually reaching over 5,000 weekly attendees across 20 satellite locations. The Meeting House pioneered the multi-site model in Canada, broadcasting Cavey's sermons via video to packed venues every Sunday. Cavey was also an author. His book, The End of Religion, argued that Jesus came to abolish religious systems, not create a new one. The message resonated with millennials and disillusioned evangelicals. Cavey's sermons were downloaded millions of times. He was widely regarded as one of Canada's most influential Christian voices. But in December 2021, everything changed. The church's board of overseers placed Cavey on leave after receiving allegations of sexual misconduct. An independent investigation was launched, and what it uncovered was devastating. The investigation found that Cavey had engaged in a years-long sexual relationship with a woman in his congregation, a relationship that began when she sought pastoral counseling from him. The woman was 23 years old when the relationship started. Cavey was 46. According to the investigation's findings, Cavey had used his position of spiritual authority to manipulate her into the relationship. It had lasted for years and only ended when she finally found the courage to come forward. The board issued a public statement. Cavey's actions constituted an abuse of power and amounted to sexual harassment. They called it a betrayal of trust, and they asked for his resignation. Cavey resigned on March 3, 2022. In a now deleted blog post titled My Confession, he admitted to what he called an extramarital affair. He acknowledged being irresponsible in his role as a spiritual leader and expressed deep regret. But the investigation didn't stop there. As news of Cavey's misconduct spread, more women came forward. The church hired a third-party victim advocate, Melody Bissell, to receive and investigate additional allegations. By June 2022, Bissell had received 38 reports of sexual misconduct, not just against Cavey, but also against other current and former male leaders at the Meeting House. A second investigation into Cavey's behavior substantiated 2 additional claims of sexual abuse by a church leader. In one case, the victim was underage when the abuse occurred. The findings shook the Meeting House to its core. Entire families left the congregation. Donors demanded refunds. Staff resigned.
and the church faced a reckoning with its own culture, one that had, according to critics, prioritized Cavey's celebrity over accountability. On May 31, 2022, Hamilton police arrested Cavey and charged him with 1 count of sexual assault. He was released on conditions and scheduled to appear in court. In December 2023, 2 additional sexual assault charges were filed. Cavey maintained his innocence and hired a high-profile defense attorney. But in July 2024, one of the charges was stayed, dismissed because the case had taken too long to come to trial, violating Cavey's right to a timely hearing under Canadian law. The other 2 charges were withdrawn shortly after, with prosecutors citing insufficient likelihood of conviction. For Cavey's legal team, it was a victory. For his victims, it was another layer of devastation. The church, meanwhile, launched multiple civil lawsuits. 3 women filed separate suits seeking $5 million each in damages, alleging that the church had failed in its duty of care to protect them from abuse by church leaders. One lawsuit described how a former youth pastor had sexually abused a girl over multiple years. Another detailed similar abuse by a different youth pastor. The complaints alleged that the church had created an environment where predators could operate with impunity, where victims were silenced and leaders were protected. The church issued public apologies. They implemented new policies. They hired consultants. But for many former members, it was too little too late. Bruxy Cavey, meanwhile, quietly re-entered ministry. He launched a website called The Ghost of 1820, a play on Matthew 18:20, and began hosting small gatherings with his family. He described himself as a mess, but framed his suffering as a good teacher. Critics were outraged. Victims felt betrayed all over again. And the question lingered, how does a man credibly accused of abusing multiple women simply rebrand and return to ministry? Cavey's story is a case study on how spiritual authority can be weaponized, how charisma can mask predatory behavior, and how institutions that prioritize image over integrity create perfect conditions for abuse. For the women who trusted Cavey and were exploited, for the families who gave years to the meeting house only to discover its leaders had been lying, there is no easy path to healing. The charges were dropped, but the damage remains. Number 7. Tony Anthony, United Kingdom. Tony Anthony was a superstar on the Christian speaking circuit. His testimony was the stuff of legend. A former martial arts champion turned international bodyguard for the rich and famous, living a life of violence, crime, and darkness, until a dramatic encounter with God in a maximum security prison transformed him into an evangelist. It was an incredible story. Millions believed it. Churches paid him thousands to tell it. And then, in 2013, investigators proved it was almost entirely fabricated. Anthony's story was told in his autobiography, Taming the Tiger, which sold hundreds of thousands of copies and was translated into multiple languages. In the book, Anthony claimed he had been trained as a child in a brutal martial arts academy in China, becoming a master of kung fu by his teenage years. He said he had worked as a bodyguard for celebrities and criminals, traveling the world and living a life of extreme violence. According to Anthony, his life of crime eventually caught up with him, and he was arrested in Cyprus on charges related to arms trafficking. He claimed he was thrown into a hellish, medieval-style prison, where he was tortured and held in solitary confinement for years. It was there, he said, he found a Bible, encountered Jesus, and was miraculously transformed. The story was compelling. It had all the elements of a blockbuster movie: exotic locations, high-stakes danger, brutal suffering, and redemptive grace. Churches around the UK and beyond invited Anthony to speak. Youth groups hung on every word. His ministry, Avanti, grew rapidly, and donations poured in. But in 2012, a Christian blogger named David Longstaff began investigating Anthony's claims. Longstaff, along with others, started asking questions. Were the details of his story verifiable? Did the martial arts academy he claimed to have attended actually exist? Were there any records of his imprisonment in Cyprus? The answers they uncovered were shocking. The martial arts academy Anthony claimed to have attended, where he said he was trained from childhood, didn't exist. Investigators contacted martial arts historians and experts in China. No one had ever heard of it. The specific style Anthony claimed to have mastered was unrecognizable to actual practitioners. The prison in Cyprus? Anthony had described it as a medieval dungeon with torture chambers and inhuman conditions, but court records told a different story. Anthony had been in prison
in Cyprus, but in a modern facility for a relatively minor offense and for a much shorter period than he claimed. There were no records of torture, no evidence of the extreme abuse he described. Even his claim of being an international bodyguard fell apart under scrutiny. Investigators found no credible evidence that Anthony had worked in the capacity he described. Former associates who knew him during the time he claimed to be living this James Bond-style existence said he was mostly unemployed and struggling financially. Longstaff and other investigators published their findings online. At first, Anthony's supporters dismissed them as attacks from skeptics trying to discredit a powerful testimony. But as more evidence mounted, pressure grew for Anthony to respond. In 2013, the Evangelistic Alliance, one of the UK's largest and most respected Christian organizations, launched its own investigation. They contacted Anthony and his ministry, requesting documentation to verify his claims. Anthony could not provide it. The Evangelistic Alliance concluded that significant portions of Anthony's testimony were either exaggerated or fabricated. They issued a public statement distancing themselves from him and his ministry and urged churches to stop inviting him to speak. Other Christian organizations followed suit. Conferences canceled his appearances, publishers stopped selling his books, and churches that had once championed his story quietly removed him from their websites. Anthony issued a statement acknowledging that some details in his testimony had been embellished, but insisted the core story was true. He claimed that some of the discrepancies were due to memory issues and the passage of time. Critics weren't buying it. The fabrications weren't minor embellishments, they were the entire framework of his story. The martial arts academy, the bodyguard work, the prison torture, these were the elements that made his testimony extraordinary. Without them, what remained was far less compelling. A man who had done some time in prison and later became a Christian. By 2014, Tony Anthony had effectively disappeared from the public Christian speaking circuit. His ministry, Avanti, shuttered quietly. His books were pulled from most Christian bookstores, and the man who had once filled auditoriums was now persona non grata. But the damage had been done. Churches that had paid Anthony thousands of dollars felt frauded. Young people who had been inspired by his story felt betrayed. And the broader Christian community was left asking, how did this happen? How did so many leaders, publishers, and organizations fail to verify such an extraordinary testimony? The answer is uncomfortable. People wanted the story to be true. It was dramatic. It was inspiring. It sold books and filled seats. And in an environment where spectacular testimonies
are often seen as evidence of God's power, there was little incentive to ask hard questions. Tony Anthony's case is a cautionary tale about the dangers of celebrity Christianity, where a compelling story can be more valuable than truth, where verification is seen as skepticism, and where accountability comes only after the damage is irreversible. For those who donated money, who believed every word, who shaped their faith around Anthony's testimony, the revelation that it was mostly fiction left scars that may never heal. The books are gone, the ministry is closed. But the questions remain: how many other testimonies are being told right now that are just as fabricated? And how many churches are too eager to believe them? Number 8, Kenneth Copeland, Texas, United States. Kenneth Copeland doesn't just preach prosperity, he embodies it. At 88 years old, he is one of the wealthiest and most controversial televangelists in America, with an estimated net worth exceeding $300 million. He owns multiple private jets, lives on a sprawling 1,500-acre estate near Fort Worth, Texas, and has built a media empire that reaches millions worldwide. And for decades, he's faced persistent questions about how he acquired that wealth and whether his ministry is more business than gospel. Copeland founded Kenneth Copeland Ministries in 1967, and from the beginning, his message was clear: God wants you rich. Faith, properly exercised, leads to financial blessing. Poverty is a curse that can be broken through giving, specifically giving to ministries like his. It's a message that has resonated with millions. Copeland's television program airs on hundreds of stations. His books and teaching materials have sold by the millions, and his annual Believers Conventions draw thousands of attendees who pay for tickets, buy merchandise, and donate generously. But by the mid-2000s, questions about Copeland's finances had reached the halls of Congress. In 2007, Senator Chuck Grassley launched his now famous investigation into 6 prominent televangelists, including Kenneth Copeland. Grassley wanted answers. How much money were these ministries taking in? Where was it going? Were donors being misled? Copeland initially refused to cooperate. He argued that as a religious organization, his ministry was not accountable to the government. He claimed that providing financial documentation would violate the separation of church and state. Grassley didn't back down. He issued subpoenas and made the investigation very public. Media outlets picked up the story, and suddenly, Copeland's lavish lifestyle was under a national spotlight. The details that emerged were staggering. Kenneth Copeland Ministries owned at least 4 private jets, including a $20 million Gulfstream 5. Copeland's compensation package was never fully disclosed, but tax documents revealed that his ministry had purchased his personal residence and the land that it sat on, then allowed him to live there rent-free. His church-owned estate included a private airstrip, a hangar, and multiple homes for family members, all funded by donor contributions. Copeland defended the jets by saying commercial airlines were filled with demons and that flying privately allowed him to focus on prayer and ministry work. He also argued that traveling by private jet allowed him to reach more cities more quickly, thus expanding his ministry's reach. Critics called it absurd. If Jesus walked, they argued, surely a man preaching his gospel could fly coach. In 2008, after months of pressure, Copeland finally provided some financial documentation to Senator Grassley, but it was incomplete. Key details about his personal compensation, asset ownership, and expenditures remained undisclosed. The Senate investigation concluded without any legal action, but the reputational damage was done. Then, in 2019, Copeland found himself in another public firestorm. Inside Edition, a national news program, sent a reporter to confront Copeland about his private jets and his claim that commercial airlines were filled with demons, and the resulting interview went viral. Copeland, visibly irritated, defended his lifestyle and grew increasingly hostile as the reporter pressed him. At one point, Copeland's facial expressions became so intense and unsettling that the clip was turned into memes and widely mocked online. But the real controversy wasn't just the jets, it was what the jets represented. A ministry built on asking struggling, working-class believers to send money so that a multimillionaire could live like a billionaire. Former staff members and donors have spoken out over the years, describing a culture inside KCM where questioning leadership was equated with lack of faith. Some described high-pressure fundraising tactics, where donors were told that giving sacrificially, even beyond their means, would result in miraculous financial returns. One former employee described the ministry as a family business disguised as a church, with Copeland's relatives holding key leadership positions and benefiting financially from the organization. But despite decades of controversy, Kenneth Copeland's ministry continues to thrive. He still preaches to packed arenas, his television program still airs, and donations still pour in. Why? Because for his followers, Copeland's wealth is proof that his message works. They see his jets, his estate, and his success as evidence that God rewards faith, and they believe that by giving to Copeland's ministry, they are positioning themselves for similar blessings. Critics call it exploitation, supporters call it faith. But one thing is certain, Kenneth Copeland has built a financial empire on the backs of donors who can least afford it. No criminal charges have ever been filed, no legal accountability has ever been enforced, and as long as religious organizations remain largely exempt from financial transparency requirements, ministries like Copeland's will continue to operate with minimal oversight. Kenneth Copeland is 88 years old. He shows no signs of slowing down, and the empire he built on private jets, prosperity theology, and the sacrificial giving of millions shows no signs of crumbling. The question is, how many more people will give their last dollar to a man who already has more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes? These stories keep getting more disturbing. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Number 9. Jim Bakker, Post-Prison Ministry and COVID Scandal, United States. Jim Bakker should be a cautionary tale. In the 1980s and 90s, he and his wife Tammy Faye built one of the most
Successful televangelism empires in American history, until it all came crashing down in a spectacular scandal involving fraud, embezzlement, and sexual misconduct. Bakker served 5 years in federal prison, lost everything, and disappeared from public life. But then, improbably, he came back, and the second act of Jim Bakker's career proved that some people never learn. In the 1970s and 80s, Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker were household names. Their television program, the PTL Club, Praise the Lord, reached millions. They built Heritage USA, a Christian theme park in South Carolina that rivaled Disneyland in attendance. They lived in luxury, wore designer clothes, and preached prosperity with unshakable confidence. But in 1987, it all fell apart. Bakker was accused of sexually assaulting a church secretary named Jessica Hahn and then using ministry funds to pay her $265,000 in hush money. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a massive financial fraud. Bakker had been selling lifetime partnerships to Heritage USA, essentially timeshare memberships, but had oversold them by the tens of thousands. There weren't enough rooms to accommodate all the people who had paid. In 1989, Jim Bakker was convicted on 24 counts of fraud and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison, later reduced to 8 years, of which he served 5. He was released in 1994, a broken and humiliated man. For years, Bakker lived quietly. He wrote a book expressing remorse, acknowledging that he had been wrong, that the prosperity gospel had corrupted him, and that he had betrayed the people who trusted him. It seemed, for a time, that he had genuinely repented. But by the early 2000s, Bakker was back on television. He launched The Jim Bakker Show, a daily program that aired on Christian networks and online. He had remarried, this time to Lori Bakker, who ran a ministry for women.
And slowly, methodically, Jim Bakker rebuilt his audience. At first, the new show seemed different. Bakker talked about his time in prison, his failures, and his faith. He interviewed guests and focused on end times prophecy. But before long, familiar patterns reemerged. Bakker began selling products. Lots of products. Emergency food kits, survival gear, colloidal silver, water filters. The sales pitches were relentless, and they were wrapped in apocalyptic rhetoric. The end is near. Society is collapsing. You need to prepare. And the only way to prepare is to buy what Jim Bakker is selling. By the late 2010s, Bakker's program had become a 24/7 infomercial for doomsday prepping products. And then came COVID-19. In February and March 2020, as the coronavirus pandemic swept across the globe, Jim Bakker saw an opportunity. On multiple episodes of his show, he began promoting a product called Silver Solution, a colloidal silver liquid that he and a guest claimed could cure or prevent COVID-19. This influenza, which is now circling the globe, you're saying that Silver Solution would be effective? Bakker asked during one broadcast. Let's say it hasn't been tested on this strain of coronavirus, but it's been tested on other strains of coronavirus and has been able to eliminate it within 12 hours, the guest responded. Bakker nodded enthusiastically and urged viewers to stock up immediately. There was just one problem. It was completely false. There was, and is, no credible scientific evidence that colloidal silver cures or prevents COVID-19. In fact, the FDA and medical professionals warn that ingesting colloidal silver can cause serious health problems, including permanent skin discoloration. Within days, the Missouri Attorney General filed a lawsuit against Bakker, accusing him of falsely advertising a fake COVID cure to vulnerable, frightened people during a global health crisis. The lawsuit sought an injunction to stop Bakker from making the claims and demanded restitution for consumers who had been defrauded. Bakker's legal team initially tried to defend the claims, but the evidence was overwhelming. In 2021, Bakker settled the lawsuit, agreeing to pay $156,000 in restitution and legal costs. He also agreed to stop making false health claims about the Silver Solution. But the damage was done. People had bought the product believing it would protect them from a deadly virus. Some may have delayed seeking actual medical treatment because they thought they were protected. And Jim Bakker, who had once gone to prison for defrauding people, had done it again. Critics were outraged, but not surprised. This was, after all, the same man who had sold fake timeshares in the 1980s, the same man who had used his platform to exploit fear and sell products that didn't deliver what they promised. But yet, the Jim Bakker Show continues to air. He still sells survival food and doomsday gear. He still preaches about the end times, and donations still come in. For his supporters, Bakker is a man who made mistakes, paid for them, and deserves a second chance. For his critics, he's a con artist who learned nothing from his time in prison, except how to avoid going back. Jim Bakker went to prison once. He could have walked away, lived quietly, and let his legacy be one of repentance. Instead, he returned to the same tactics, the same manipulation, and the same exploitation. Some lessons, it seems, are never learned. Number 10. Joel Osteen, Texas, United States. Joel Osteen is not like the others on this list. He has never been charged with a crime. He has never been credibly accused of sexual misconduct. He has never fled the country or gone to prison. And yet, his name appears here because his story raises questions that millions of people are asking. Can you preach Jesus and live like a millionaire? Can you ask people for money while sitting on a fortune? And when disaster strikes, is it enough to smile and say, God has a plan, or do you actually have to help? Joel Osteen is the pastor of Lakeland Church in Houston, Texas, the largest megachurch in the United States, with weekly attendance exceeding 50,000. He inherited the church from his father, John Osteen, in 1999, and under Joel's leadership, it exploded in size and influence. His sermons are broadcast to millions, his books are bestsellers, and his net worth is estimated at over $100 million. Osteen's message is relentlessly positive. He preaches about God's favor, about living your best life now, about overcoming obstacles through faith and optimism. He rarely mentions sin, hell, or judgment. His sermons feel more like motivational speeches than traditional preaching. And for millions of people, that's exactly what they need. But in August 2017, Joel Osteen faced the biggest public relations crisis of his career, and it had nothing to do with theology. Hurricane Harvey slammed into the Texas coast, dumping unprecedented amounts of rain on Houston and surrounding areas. The city flooded, thousands of people were displaced, emergency shelters filled to capacity, and churches across the region opened their doors to provide refuge, food, and supplies. But Lakewood Church, housed in a massive 16,800-seat arena in the heart of Houston, remained closed. Social media erupted. Photos circulated showing the church's massive facility, dry and unused, while people slept on cots in overcrowded shelters. Osteen was accused of hypocrisy, of hoarding resources, of caring more about protecting his church's expensive carpets than helping desperate people. Osteen initially released a statement saying the church was inaccessible due to severe flooding. But reporters went to the church and found that while some street flooding had occurred nearby, the building itself was not flooded and could have been opened. Under mounting pressure, Lakewood Church finally opened its doors several days after the storm, only after public outrage had reached a fever pitch. Osteen defended the delayed response, saying that the church had been coordinating with the city and waiting for official requests to open as a shelter. But for many, the explanation rang hollow. Other churches had opened immediately, without waiting for permission. They had rolled up their sleeves, mobilized volunteers, and acted. Lakewood had waited. And in that waiting, Joel Osteen's carefully curated image as a man of compassion took a serious hit. The Hurricane Harvey controversy wasn't the only time Osteen faced criticism. For years, skeptics have questioned his wealth and lifestyle. Osteen lives in a $10.5 million mansion in the affluent River Oaks neighborhood of Houston. He drives luxury cars. He vacations in exclusive resorts. And while he claims not to take a salary from Lakewood Church, he earns millions from book sales and speaking engagements. Critics argue that Osteen's wealth is a direct result of his ministry. His books sell because of his platform. His speaking fees are high because he's the pastor of Lakewood Church. To say he doesn't take a salary is technically true, but functionally misleading. Defenders counter that Osteen has never asked his congregation for money for himself. Lakewood Church, they point out, is financially self-sustaining, owns its building, and gives millions to charity. But the optics remain uncomfortable. A preacher living in a $10 million
mansion while people in his city struggle to pay rent. And then, in 2021, came one of the strangest twists in Osteen's story. Plumbers working on a repair at Lakewood Church discovered envelopes stuffed inside a wall. Inside the envelopes, cash and checks totaling over $600,000. The discovery immediately sparked speculation. Was this the money stolen during a 2014 burglary, when thieves made off with $600,000 in cash and checks from the church? Had an inside job gone wrong? Had someone hidden the money intending to retrieve it later? Police investigated, but found no evidence linking Joel Osteen or church leadership to any wrongdoing. The money was turned over to authorities, and the case remains unsolved. But the discovery reignited questions about financial transparency at Lakewood Church. Unlike most churches, Lakewood does not publicly disclose detailed financial information. The church is not required to by law, and like many megachurches, it chooses to operate with minimal transparency. For critics, that's the problem. How can congregants and the public trust that donations are being used appropriately if there's no accountability?
Joel Osteen's story is different from the others on this list because it's not a story of criminal behavior or overt scandal. It's a story of perception, of values, and of the uncomfortable tension between Jesus' teachings about wealth and humility and the reality of a pastor who lives like a celebrity. Jesus told a rich young ruler to sell everything and give to the poor. He said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. He lived without a home, washed his disciples' feet, and died on a cross. Joel Osteen lives in a mansion, writes bestsellers, and preaches that God wants you to prosper. Are the two compatible? Millions of Osteen's followers say yes. They see his success as evidence that God blesses those who preach his word. They believe that prosperity is a sign of favor, not a contradiction of faith. Critics say no. They see a man who has turned Christianity into a brand, who has sanitized the gospel of anything uncomfortable, and who has built an empire on a message that asks nothing of its followers except to think positively and give generously. Joel Osteen has never broken the law, but he has broken something else: the trust of people who believe that a man preaching Jesus should live more like Jesus. And the question remains, is Joel Osteen a pastor, or is he a motivational speaker with a really big church? The hurricane revealed the answer. When disaster struck, the doors stayed closed. And for many, that said everything. 10 preachers, 10 ministries, 10 cases that revealed the same uncomfortable truth. Trust is the easiest thing to exploit, and spiritual authority is the hardest to hold accountable. Some of these men committed crimes. Others simply committed betrayals. A few destroyed lives deliberately. Others did it through negligence, greed, or a failure to recognize that wealth and power are not the same as holiness. But all of them had one thing in common. They stood behind pulpits and asked people to believe them, to follow them, to give to them. And millions did, because when someone claims to speak for God, questioning them feels like questioning God himself. That's the trap. That's the mechanism of spiritual abuse. The prosperity preachers promised miracles in exchange for money, but the miracles never came. The abusers used spiritual language to manipulate and control. The fraudsters built empires on lies, then fled when investigators closed in. And the institutions that should have stopped them, churches, boards, denominations, either looked the other way or enabled the abuse. So what can we learn from these stories? First, spiritual authority is not a shield from accountability. Just because someone preaches, just because they quote scripture, just because they claim divine inspiration, that does not mean they are above the law or beyond question. In fact, those in positions of spiritual leadership should be held to higher standards, not lower ones. Second, follow the money. If a ministry cannot or will not disclose how donations are being spent, that's a red flag. If a pastor lives in luxury while asking congregants to give sacrificially, that's a red flag. If financial secrecy is defended in the name of religious freedom, ask yourself, what are they hiding? Third, trust your instincts. If something feels manipulative, controlling, or abusive, it probably is. Spiritual leaders who isolate you from dissent, who equate questioning them with disobeying God, who use fear and guilt to control behavior, these are not shepherds. They are predators. And fourth, remember that charisma is not the same as character. Some of the most compelling speakers, the most dynamic preachers, the most successful ministry leaders are also the most dangerous. A powerful stage presence does not equal integrity. A large following does not equal truth. And finally, demand reform. Religious organizations operate with a level of financial opacity and legal protection that would be unthinkable in any other sector. That needs to change. Churches should be transparent. Leaders should be accountable, and victims should have legal recourse. These 10 preachers destroyed lives. Some are in prison. Others are still preaching. A few are living in luxury, funded by the very people they betrayed. But the damage they caused, the shattered faith, the stolen money, the abused trust, can never be undone. For the families who gave everything to ministries built on lies, for the victims who were manipulated and abused by men claiming to represent God, for the congregations that were left devastated when the truth came out, there is no easy path forward. But there is a path, and it starts with awareness. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. These stories are hard to tell, and they're even harder to hear. But they matter, because awareness is the first step toward change. Before you go, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this video opened your eyes, challenged your assumptions, or made you think differently about who you trust, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. We cover the stories that others won't touch, the cases that are uncomfortable, controversial, and impossible to ignore. And we do it because the truth matters even when it's painful. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions. We'll see you in the next one.